So, but we also edit. And so there is room for whatever, you need to stop and, chat with the cat again, or if God help the plumber comes up here, we can pause for whatever is needed. So, but otherwise we shall get started.
That sounds good.
And make sure my sound is where it's supposed to be.
Does my sound okay coming into your end? I'm using a microphone.
Yeah. No, it sounds good.
Okay.
You sound good to me.
You're listening to
Sticky Note Conversations with Erika Washington. Way below acceptable. Way below acceptable.
On this week's episode,
at January 6th, what we saw was a lot of people who had the money to travel and had the types of jobs and ability to be able to show up for things like that. And a lot of the power behind white nationalism in this country is actually a lot of middle class and rich folks.
Way below acceptable.
Hey there, Sticky Note listeners. I am really excited for today's episode. I've been thinking a lot about us as a community and how we support each other. You've been listening to the last few episodes. I've sort of leaned into that a little bit and talking about how we move away from individualistic goals and more community-based goals, and thinking about how we take care of our neighbors, but also watch out for them, and also stand up for what we believe is right. And I was scrolling through Facebook, which I do probably more than I should. And I ran across a post made by a fabulous writer, and it had to do with white supremacy, and it had to do with a certain sect of white nationalists that had been arrested. And we'll get into the details of that. But these folks had been arrested, and I had never heard of this group. I didn't know anything about what they stood for, or that they were even being looked at, or what have you. And I realized I know very little about white supremacists or white nationalist groups per se, and what work they're doing, how many of them there are in the country and moving around. Whereas when it comes to gangs, it seems like that's always in the news, and it's become part of culture to know who the Crips and the Bloods are and stuff like that. And so, anywho, I thought it would be a great idea to have her on. So Gwen Frisbie-Fulton, who is, we'll be friends very shortly. We can call each other friends. We met last year, I think. Yeah, it was last year in New Orleans. We were on a panel together, and I thought she was great, interesting then, and even more so following her on Facebook and reading her Substacks and the work that she's done. So I just want all of you to listen to this fabulous conversation that we're getting ready to have. And let's think about what white supremacy actually is, and then how we actually combat it. Anywho, Gwen, welcome to Sticky Note Conversations.
Thanks, Erika. And yeah, it was a year and some change ago, maybe, that we were in a very hot city in New Orleans. And it was great meeting you there too. It was great to talk about organizing with you there.
Yes, in organizing, that's my jam. So diving right in, I want to ask you a little bit about your background. And we talked a little bit offline about how you grew up and where you grew up, and wanting to connect it back to the work that you do now. Tell me a little bit about who is Gwen when you meet people. What do you want people to know about you in your life?
Yeah. So on a professional level, I'm a writer. I'm a columnist. I write a Substack called Working Class Storytelling. And I'm a working class white woman from the U.S. South, right? So I've got Appalachian roots and Southern roots, and I'm a mom who's raised my kid here in North Carolina. And I say all of that because it kind of brings us to what we're talking about. I live in a community that I love. I love the South. I love North Carolina. I love Appalachia. But we have a rough history. Everywhere where you go here, you're reminded of elements of the Confederacy, and you're reminded through monuments and through conversation. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about how white folks are raised how I was raised, how I raised my son, given this history and where our responsibilities are. All of this fast forwards to sort of the most politically deep formation, the most formative experience I've had, which was living in a neighborhood, not in the South, it was in the Midwest, in Indianapolis, where I ended up living right up the street from a group of neo-Nazi white nationalists. And, obviously didn't mean to do that. But that's where I ended up being. And they, in a weird way, I can thank them for my now much deeper understanding of politics in our country and what the forces we need to be organizing against are and what forces we need to be organizing with.
Did you know that they were neo-Nazi, just white nationalists? Were they wearing swastikas or was it a little bit more subtle than all of that?
Yeah, so that's great. That's a great question. And I need to put that in context. So this is going back. I'm not young anymore. This is going back to when I was in my 20s and I was living in Indianapolis, Indiana. And this would have been around 2006, 2007, 2008. Okay. So, and I'm bringing that up because there's been shifts and changes in how they operate. So at the time, the way you knew they were neo-Nazis is they flew a large swastika flag in front of their house. So, there was no confusion there. And let me tell you that this neighborhood that I lived in was a very poor, once working class community that was overwhelmingly white. Most of my neighbors were white, and it was filled with Appalachian immigrants who had come after coal jobs had really dried up. And so it was sort of a refugee community from Appalachia where people were trying to find new jobs by moving out to Indianapolis, Detroit, Cincinnati. And I lived there for many years, and it's a great neighborhood. I loved my neighbors. We became very, very close. And while I was living there, this group moved into the neighborhood. They were not from the neighborhood, and I want to be very clear about that. They moved into the neighborhood, and they bought a house, and they put up a flagpole, and they flew swastikas, and they flew a screwdriver flag. Screwdriver is a white power band. And they were skinheads, and they dressed in sort of a very stereotypical way, right? They wore braces. They call them braces with suspenders. They laced up their boots in certain ways to show, their affiliation. And they were there to make sure that we all knew exactly who they were. They weren't hiding anything. And they came to that neighborhood to recruit young folks. And that, I was young at the time myself, but it really dawned on me because I just had a son and was planning on raising him in that neighborhood. And I could see that these guys had come to the neighborhood because it was a very dead-end seeming place. There weren't a lot of opportunities. It was pretty high crime. There's a lot of hardship in the community. And it was the butt of all jokes with the rest of the city. People would make fun of that neighborhood and the people who lived there. And they came in as total opportunists to try to siphon off, in particular, young men into their movement. And that really, with all those hormones running as a new mom, that really, really irked me and bothered me. And so that's how we knew they were white nationalists, is they were very clear at that time in telling us that they were. There was no confusion around that. Now, that has changed pretty significantly in the way that these groups operate contemporarily.
When you say high crime, when you say this, I'm trying to set a picture of this neighborhood. When you say high crime, what type of crimes were happening? Are you, was it mostly theft and robbery? Was there a lot of drug use, that sort of thing?
Yeah. It was mostly crimes of desperation, right? I remember when I moved there, beautiful neighborhood, just beautiful, beautiful houses. And as I learned, really, really great people. But I remember when I first moved into the house, I was borrowing my dad's van, and I left it parked in front of the house and hadn't moved in yet. And then when I showed up the next morning, it had been broken into.
Mm-hmm.
And, I learned that, yeah, that's what's going to happen. Don't leave your dad's tools in your dad's van in front of the house. So it was a lot of theft, and a lot of drug use. This is really when meth was getting a stranglehold on communities like that. And you could see the evidence of it all over. But I want to be clear. This was also a family neighborhood. All of my neighbors, had extended family and kids. One of the joyful bits of the neighborhood is that grandparents lived a few doors up from grandchildren, and everyone was sort of connected and related. And it was a really joyful place to be as well, despite just the hardships and the poverty. But it was rough, right? There's just no denying
I'm assuming
that.
there was a lack of jobs, good paying jobs that would provide for families.
Indianapolis in the 50s and 60s and into the 70s was a pretty prosperous place. Chrysler had a really big plant right outside the neighborhood. There was a big coke firing place right outside the neighborhood that you could smell all the time. But at this point in early 2000s, Indianapolis had been 20 years into a really rough situation across the city, but you could really see it demonstrably in this neighborhood and a few other neighborhoods. And there was just folks who had moved up there a generation before for jobs, and those jobs were now gone for the children that they had.
You said refugee. So thinking about folks who moved from the Appalachian areas who mostly had jobs in coal is what I understand and what I have read. And so when those jobs became non-existent because we moved away from coal in heating and such, so then they migrated into the north north in the Midwest areas in which to find better opportunities for their family, and did so for a short amount of time until those jobs dried up, and then folks stayed there or maybe even went back or what have you. But either way, not having access to the resources that they needed, quality housing and good jobs, which leads to crime, which leads to a host of other issues, domestic violence, and all these different things can stem from impoverished and destitute spaces. But also what seems to grow from that is the idea of needing to form other families or other sense of community, which makes me think about gangs, right? Because you could have taken everything you said and been talking about a Black urban area with the exact same struggles of folks coming up from the South during the Great Migration, and folks went north, they went east, they went west, they went wherever looking for better opportunities and found some. And then those also dried up as well. My grandfather worked for Chrysler and he retired from Chrysler. He worked there for 30 plus years. If he was still alive, that job wouldn't have been there, if it would have been a generation later. And so it's really the same in a lot of ways. It's the same economic hardships which cause us to migrate and to move. I mean, we could also say the same thing about folks coming into the country. Absolutely. It's a struggle, and everyone's just always looking for a better place to land and support their family. And that happens for a certain amount of time, and then it stops. And then folks get involved in gangs, or they get involved in white nationalist sort of sex. So here we are now, because as you said, it's not the same as 2007 as it is right now. I want to ask you, what do you think changed? I mean, besides the obvious of like who the president is, but how did getting from that point of waving a flag with a swastika on it, which even bigots, can like push back and be like, well, that's kind of too much. You're doing a lot here with the swastika. I just don't like those colors, but I'm not about to wave a flag sort of thing, to get to a point where it's grown so much and the machine has been fed. Like, what do you think caused that?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I think that what I find so interesting about this group that moved into this neighborhood is actually their transition. And so let me tell you their story, if I may. So the group that moved into my neighborhood and bought that house and flew those swastika flags was called the Vinlanders. They were formed by a guy named Brian James, who had been part of the white nationalist movement for a number of years at this point. And he had been in another group called the Hammerskins. And rumor is he was kicked out for being too violent, which is, you got to be pretty violent to get kicked out of the Hammerskins. They're known for their violence. And he formed this other group that talked about Nordic pride and all of these other things. And like I said, was explicitly neo-Nazi. They were no bones about it. So the Vinlanders were active in this neighborhood 2006, 2007, 2008, something along those lines, until they got into a bunch of trouble because group members were in downtown Indianapolis, and in broad daylight, they attacked a Black man, just about killing him in the middle of the street. Bystanders who tried to intervene and tried to call for help were threatened by the group. But like I said, these guys, you knew where they lived. A number of the Vinlanders ended up getting arrested, and they did get convicted for attempted murder. The group kind of fell apart, I guess, during this time. I also left. I was a single mom raising a child in this neighborhood, and I was like, I just can't. I can't do this. This is terrifying, right? And so I had left the neighborhood and lost a little bit of track of them. At some point, their clubhouse building burnt down. I don't really know the timeline on that. And they kind of dissipated, right? But you and I are talking today because an article about a bunch of Vinlanders getting arrested just came out, going on 20 years later. And so what happened during that is these groups at the time, back in the early 2000s, felt fringe. They were scary, they were violent, they were dangerous. But we're talking about like 8 guys in a clubhouse, right? Trying to recruit some more kids. The next time I hear about Brian James, the founder of the Vinlanders, is that he shows up in Charlottesville. And he marches in that march in Charlottesville, but he's no longer a neo-Nazi. He's now a Proud Boy. And he's no longer, according to him, racist, but he's a nationalist. Everything started to shift. And we saw in Charlottesville the sheer numbers, and I think people were shocked. And a movement that has always existed in U.S. history, let's make no bones about it, right? This has always been an undercurrent, but at least they were seen as fringe, right? All of a sudden felt mainstream and could get a nod from people in power, including the President of the United States. That was a huge shift. They also realized after Charlottesville that they were not doing a very good job recruiting people when they flew swastikas. And so they started to rebrand in ways that were made it less clear, right? They no longer wanted to look like tough neo-Nazi skinheads wearing their braces and boots and, but now they wanted to look more professional, look more mainstream. And they're not dummies, right? There's a lot of stereotypes about who these folks are, but a lot of them are very intelligent folks. And they rebranded across their movements to fly more under the radar and to scoot closer to the center of the United States to be able to recruit more people because they just weren't growing when they flew swastikas in their front yard. And so you look at somebody like Brian James, who's very active, head of the Hoosier State Proud Boys today. He does like political podcasts now and talks about policy. He's no longer just using the N-word and talking about violence. He's now talking about things like healthcare. He's now talking about things like immigration policy. He did a live stream recently trying to get white nationalists to show up in Minneapolis, right? But he's doing it no longer wanting to sort of look thuggish and scary. He's trying to do it as if he's moving in concert with the administration. And I don't know if Brian James has had a change of heart, but I would seriously doubt it. He's just figured out that he can get platformed more and get more recruits if he cleans himself up.
Honestly, to me, that just sounds like a sugar versus vinegar gets more flies sort of conversation, right? So it's like, oh, wait, we're being too harsh. We need to brush up our image and we need to present ourselves in a certain kind of way so we attract the folks that we want. And that way we still get to where we're trying to get to. And I think that may be one of the reasons why folks sit in a place of denial and say, oh, well, the Ku Klux Klan folks aren't out wearing white sheets with pointy hats and burning crosses in front of people's yards. So it must not exist anymore. It just must not be, when now they're wearing suits and ties and they're running for office or they're getting appointed to certain positions within the administration, or they're running other businesses that actually can then move money into the places that need to be invigorated with cash in order to get their point across. And so I think that was a part of what really triggered me, I think, with reading that post on Facebook, was when someone had commented and said something, really negative about how the guys looked, the mugshots of the Vinlanders that had been arrested, and making, statements as to, them. I can't remember what he said, that they looked like they were cousins or, married their cousins or something pejorative that people say about people from the South or, that sort of thing. And you shut it down real quick and you're like, nope, they look just like everybody else, and then you linked another article. And I thought that was really important because it can make you feel better momentarily to say something negative about someone and to say they look like they sleep with their sister. But that doesn't do anything to help the bigger picture of removing this from our country. And it doesn't help to think that we need to other folks as those types of folks who do that versus it's just folks who are white trash or whatever it is people want to, whatever pejorative language that they want to use. And it's like, well, no, they're actually people who, work, and belong to unions, and folks who run large businesses or small businesses, folks who are in government, people are running for office, and they feel this way as well. And so it's not a toothless person that you're, trying to attack. And so I thought that was really interesting. And I think it really made me think about, how are we missing the point if we're spending so much time trying to brush it aside as to it's those other people and not the people that are directly around us.
That's right. It's the things that we're getting wrong about white nationalists and extremist groups is exactly what's allowing them to grow, right? And I've never, Erika, seen people more invested in making sure that those white people are the bad, sound like the backwards hillbillies than progressive white folks. And I just think we're really causing a problem by doing that. Because what we're not doing is we're not looking it straight in the face. We're not taking the evidence that's in front of us and figuring out what we're going to do about it. Like you said, it's sort of, it makes us feel better maybe. But I would even argue that kind of feedback, I think the person who commented, was a great guy who posted that, but who commented, said something about them looking inbred, right? Which is a common thing that is said about Southerners and about white Southerners, and in particular about white Southern Appalachians. And I would argue that not only is it getting it wrong and allowing them to grow because they can move undetected in ways that we're just not focusing in on if we're always looking for something real backwoods, but also would make the case that you're alienating people and dismissing an entire population of people who are actually probably allies with us. And that's white Appalachian hillbillies, who are some of the best people I know and actually hold a lot of the same values. So you're doing two problematic things there. You're also creating conditions in which you're not allowing an entire population to be a part of you because you're constantly cutting them out and cutting them off. And you just can't win that way. Look at January 6th. A lot of people tried to respond to that, sort of saying, look at this riffraff right, who showed up and did this unbelievable amount of damage and violence. Look at these guys. And I'm like, in Charlottesville at January 6th, what we saw was a lot of people who had the money to travel and had the types of jobs and ability to be able to show up for things like that. And that is not some poor Appalachians, I'll tell you that. That's a lot of orthodontists and a lot of small business owners and a lot of ex-police officers. And we need to reckon with that and realize that a lot of the power and spark behind white nationalism in this country is actually a lot of middle class and rich folks. I'm not saying that poor folks aren't involved, but it's a lot of grifters and a lot of opportunists who are trying to light sparks that ultimately hold up white supremacy, which holds up corporations, which holds up wealth in this country. And I think that if we do due diligence as organizers, we're going to look a little straighter in the face and figure out where our responsibility is and what we can do to intervene with that, because we're too far into this to keep getting it wrong.
You're listening to
Sticky Note Conversations with Erika Washington.
You said something that I thought was really important, that we're missing a whole swath of people because we've labeled everyone the same. So, you have your, as you put it, hillbilly folks who could be allies, who probably are allies, but you're not talking to them because you're making assumptions about who they are without asking them, which again then leads people to like, hey, you don't even care about what I need or what I feel. And so what does my vote matter? And I'm sure they're part of that population that didn't vote in the last election, because there were 90 plus million people who did not cast a vote. And many folks really do believe that it doesn't matter, and they don't feel like they're heard. And that's a large swath of white Americans, that is included in that. I'm wondering if organizations are really spending the quality time that is needed to get to know those folks and understanding what it is that they need and want, and how they want to be seen and heard in this country as citizens.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is the story of our political division and fragmentation, and seemingly the progressives' inability to win, is not paying attention to what's right in front of us, which, like, I've never met a people that is more instinctually anti-corporate than a bunch of old coal miners.
They have been consistently hurt by a lot of this technology. Yeah,
they know it. But we walk around and we say things like people are voting against their own interests, and we use all these phrases and sayings to explain things away that kind of cast aside like the fullness and roundness of human beings, right? And the point is, it's a whole nother topic, right? But we have a political system and political parties where people are having a really hard time on the right and the left finding their political home, right? We're all sort of swimming around. Something is shifting. Parties are changing. What was isn't. What, isn't will be. And we're all trying to like reorient. And we keep on trying to drop people into boxes. And the truth of the matter is people don't have political homes because we're not making them. And I think that's so much of our job. When I think back to my neighborhood, what the Vinlanders were doing is coming into a neighborhood that was the laughingstock of the community at that time. Everybody sort of made fun of it as, the sort of toothless place of people on meth. And when you're defined that way by outsiders, you need to figure out how to define how you use the people who live there to define themselves and create our own narrative and our own stories about who we are, who we've been, who we want to be. And the Vinlanders were moving in to try to give that story to young folks in that community. And it became glaring. It took me years, but looking back at it, it became very clear to me that that's what they're doing. And our job as organizers is to give people a different story. And I think about it all the time, as a Southerner here, and thinking about we have choices about how we talk about history. We have choices about how we talk about our neighbors. And we can either lift up heroes and a bright future and show people through stories how communities can work together, how they have worked together to get real good things, or we can let big money corporations and oligarchs tell us stories that fragment us up. I think here in the South, there's a bunch of interesting stories that we could be taught. We could be taught about how during Reconstruction here in North Carolina, there was a massive movement called the Fusion Movement, where newly emancipated poor Black folk and poor white farmers were forming political coalitions together in the 1870s and voting and winning leadership in Eastern North Carolina. I was never taught about this. I was only taught about, a very glossed over version of Reconstruction and not that political complexity. But what that tells me is that people have always been trying to figure out ways to make things right and work for them in their communities and forming interesting and even unlikely coalitions with each other. And big institutionalized power has come to squash that out. The way the fusion movement was squashed out in North Carolina was through the Wilmington Massacre, where Black folks with white votes supporting them had won a majority in the Wilmington City Council, and that could not stand. And wealthy white landowners came in to overturn that election and perform the, at that time, only successful coup in U.S. history. But we could tell those stories and we could allow people to lean into that history of themselves and be like, Dad, our ancestors were great. Like they were doing interesting organizing and things, or we could ignore it. And I think that that's what I'm interested in is it's like, how do we go back to my old neighborhood and tell those young people a new story of themselves that is better than anything the Vinlanders could ever tell them, and invite them into that story. And that's where we're failing as a movement right now. And I think I said this to you before. There's no reason in 2026 that I should see a news article come across my feed that a bunch of Vinlanders have been arrested again, and they're all 19 and 20-year-old kids. There should not be able to be recruiting into a movement like that. That is on us to be creating better political homes and better stories.
I was going to ask, how young were they recruiting when you were first seeing them? Because it feels like a very vulnerable time. There's a lot going on. Teenagers usually are pretty self-centered, but also at the same time, trying to figure out who they are, and their self-esteem can be all over the place. Your hormones are all over the place. Your world is very small at that point in your life for a lot of folks, not all, but most. And so if you are feeling down about yourself, or you're feeling like you don't fit, like you're the square peg, that it becomes a very vulnerable time.
Yeah, I think that's late teens, early 20s was what they were recruiting in my old neighborhood going on 20 years ago. And it's what they're trying to recruit today, right? And that's across the board. There's big movements like Patriot Front is one of the sort of most prominent white nationalist groups in the country right now. And they are pretty exclusively young white men under the age of 30. And there's a real reason for that, Erika, right? All the reasons you just said. And also, I'm the mother of a 19-year-old white boy, and he has a bright future ahead of him. I believe that as a mama. But he's also facing a really daunting world, right? Like, You can go to college and you may or may not have a job. You might just have debt until you're 40. You can do all the things right. And you can go to trade school and get a really solid apprenticeship and still not be able to afford rent somewhere. When you live in conditions like that for young people, and that's what the future looks like, and you're doing everything right, you're looking for stories to make sense of that, right? And that's true at every age. Man, we're still doing that today, right, Erika? Like you and I are doing that. Like we're humans. That's what we did.
Well, we're trying to figure out what perimenopause is. Right. You're trying to figure out how we fit in. Trying to figure out, is this normal? Am I normal? Is this what's supposed to be happening right now? So yeah, it's just a different phase and different insecurities.
Yeah, and we're humans, and humans look for patterns, we look for stories, and we look for answers that make it make sense. And I think that, what these groups are doing is they're moving in, they're swooping in, they're targeting young men around race, but also, I want to be very clear, around gender, in ways to try to make sense of a changing world, make sense of why things look so bleak. And they're giving them answers, and they're giving them answers that are wrong. They're giving them answers that are, immigrants. They're giving them answers that are women. They're giving them answers that are destructive and dividing us up, instead of pointing the finger where it needs to go, which is, a class of wealth and oligarchy that's running our country. That makes a lot more sense if you start, piecing the pieces together. But that's the work we need to do so that this other story is nonsense and understood to be nonsense by these young folks.
Yeah, and I want to make sure I highlight, you mentioned the Wilmington Massacre, and I watched a documentary, I think last year on it, and I didn't know anything about it. And I think I was just up and I go down various rabbit holes, researching things. And so I ended up watching this documentary. And so I just wanted to make note of people who are unfamiliar with the Wilmington Massacre that you can on YouTube watch this documentary called American Coup, Wilmington, 1898. It was a PBS American Experience documentary. Because as soon as you said it, I was like, oh, yes, wait, I know about that. Why do I know about that? And I didn't learn it in school, nor, was it something that was even mentioned much throughout any of my time of studying about just emancipation and Reconstruction and just all of the different ups and downs since this country came to be. But what struck me about that documentary is that there are so many Black folks who left in the middle of the night or what have you. They had to escape, and they left houses and land that they owned, and it's just up and gone. It wasn't like they could then over the internet sell it, do a for sale by owner or whatever, or find a realtor and sell their house or something. Folks left everything they had and had to start over in a lot of ways. And I'm sure there were some white folks who were overly friendly with the Black folks who also then had to leave and or be killed as well. And so you think about how much wealth is lost when your family owned land, but land just disappeared, and then you have to start over from scratch somewhere else. And, I think that's also could be said about folks in Appalachia who had homes and what have you, and they had good paying jobs for a long time until they didn't, and then they had to leave. And if they have to leave, who are you selling to? How are you gathering money to go land somewhere else and start over? You're pretty much just starting from scratch.
Yeah. Amazing documentary. I went to high school here in North Carolina. I was never taught anything about the Wilmington Massacre. I was taught very little about Reconstruction, but I sure was taught about the War of Northern Aggression, as they called it. I'm not that old, but that's the way it was being taught in the 1990s in North Carolina. And we're just really missing opportunities to lift up all the times when a real multiracial democracy has been at our fingertips and been created by people. It's never been created from the top. It's always been created by working folks. But, That's not at the center of our teachings, nor is it at the center of the stories that we even tell ourselves within our movements. And it really should be. So when Appalachians left Tennessee, North Carolina, West Virginia, Kentucky, and kind of headed west to the Midwest in the 1950s, 60s, into the 70s, that was called the Hillbilly Highway. And it's actually the second largest migration that's occurred in our history. And we don't really learn about that either. And I think you're right. There's this history of poor white folks being displaced as well. There's many stories of fighting back against, big corporations and coal in West Virginia. A lot of really cool radical history there. But it's been a hard knock, 150 years, right? And I can't help but think about all of that and then think about J.D. Vance. And
I was going to ask you, did you read his book?
Oh, Lord. Yeah, I've read his book. I've read Better Writing. But what I'll say about his book is it's not untrue. I'm sure it resonated, right? I've known folks and bore witness to a lot of what he talks about in that book, right? So I read it and I got it, I understood it. But for him to take those experiences and turn them into white grievance is remarkable to me. And just about a month ago, I was listening to him give a speech at Turning Point USA, and he said this line, something
in the United States of America, you don't have to apologize for being white anymore.
You will no longer have to apologize for being white. And the audience cheers. And my son looked at me and he was like, Mom, I've never had to apologize for being white. I was like, me neither. And every single person in that audience, and J.D. Vance himself, has never been in a situation where he's had to apologize for being white. That does not exist. That is not real. That is a story that is being given. And not only does it, make me upset, but it also just makes me think, when you're sold that story, it is the most destructive and harmful story to white folks. It is such a dangerous path to go down that has only bad ends. People who join into white grievance, people who join these white nationalist movements, whether they're extreme neo-Nazis or just some non-denominational church that's kind of running itself on grievance, but it's kind of like grievance light. When you enter into those places, the end is always destructive versus the version of ourselves that can actually have real prosperity, real security, which is always a multiracial democracy. And at the end of the day, that's always what actually just tangibly works better for us. And to send people down this path and listening to J.D. Vance say that, something that's just demonstrably untrue. He's never had to apologize, not once.
I did hear that.
For him to send people, to send especially young folks down that path, that's always a path that's dangerous. The number of destructive relationships, the amount of violence within these groups that he's steering people towards through language like that is going to destroy people's lives. And I just don't want that for people. I don't want that for anybody. And it seems grossly irresponsible, and he knows that.
And I also read the book. I read it years ago. It's somewhere in my house. I don't know. And I read it when it first came out. I don't even know what made me pick it up. I understood some of the things that he said in it, whether I necessarily agree with him or not, but I understood his point of view, and I thought it was semi-interesting. I also had read Better Writing, but also it was really interesting to me that even in that space, they were still able to other, because his I think his grandmother or whatever, still looked down upon the Black folks who got welfare because they didn't, and or what. And it was just like, okay, but y'all all are living in the same. Y'all are poor. Like everybody's poor, but like you're a better poor sort of thing. And it's like this oppression Olympics sort of thing happening, that you have to be one step better than someone else, and it helps make you feel better even when you barely have a pot to put in yourself. And it's always so interesting to me, and I think that is what I feel like I'm seeing in the media, whether it's social media or television or what have you, and what's coming out of our government is we have to make folks feel like they're better than someone else. Even though right now we are breaking you too, and you can't afford groceries any more than the person next to you, but you're not an immigrant, you're not Black, you're not this, you're something else. And I think that when it comes to the idea around having to apologize for being anything, but especially having to apologize for being white. I will say I have seen white people apologize for being white on social media, and I've seen white people have apologized to me for being white, and it's very performative. And it's one of those things where you can tell that it's a matter of, oh my goodness, I'm so embarrassed about what other folks are doing. And so they'll say something of that nature, like, I'm sorry, I'm white or something. And I'm like, well, that's not helpful to me. And it's actually not helpful to you either. And no one's saying don't be proud of who you are and your background and your where you're from, who your mama is, that sort of thing. But it's understanding that what that privilege still brings you, regardless whether you agree with what is happening or not. You have a certain amount of power that you can use in certain ways, and apologizing for it doesn't help anyone else. It doesn't level the playing field in any way. Right. And so I have seen people do it, and I think the people who do apologize for being white aren't necessarily his audience that he's looking for either.
It is not.
Because they may even have some good intentions when they're saying it, even though if it's not necessarily helpful. But it is stoking those fires, and it's a different sort of dog whistle, right? That's what it's coming down to, and many of us are missing it because it's actually coming out of the White House in such a different way than we expected.
Because it's coming out of J.D. Vance's mouth at the Turning Point USA stage, and it's not coming out of the mouth of Brian James back when he used to fly a swastika in his front yard, right? But it's the same whistle. They're blowing on the same whistle. And that's where the shift has occurred, right? Is that these organizations and groups are just closer to power now than they were 20 years ago. And that's why I say that we need to look at these things just really straight-eyed.
Sticky Note Conversations with Erika Washington.
Hi, my name is Aaron Ford.
Hi, my name is Nina Nova.
Hi, I'm Lori Lee.
And you're listening to
Sticky Note Conversations
with Erika Washington.
Hey y'all, I'm Erika Washington, the host, creator, and executive producer of Sticky Note Conversations. My life, my mind, is always running way too fast. So I jot down thoughts, questions about life, wish lists, goals, all on sticky notes. One sticky note was this podcast. Over the course of my journalism and social justice journey, I've met some really amazing people, but I hated that I couldn't talk longer and really dive into their lived experiences, their views of the world, and their dreams for the future. Sticky Note Conversation is for anyone who enjoys a really good conversation.
Sticky Note Conversations with Erika Washington.
While you were talking, I was thinking about, there's a lot of different stories about where the term redneck comes from. And I'm not a historian. I couldn't tell you which one is true. But I've heard everything from one version that I think I grew up hearing a bit was these were poor white folks who worked alongside emancipated Black folks in the same fields, and they were so embarrassed to be at the same level and status as Black folks that they refused to wear hats that would actually produce the shade they needed to work in the fields, and they'd get rednecks, they'd get burnt. So that's one version I've heard. Another version I've heard, and I prefer and choose to believe, is that it comes from the Battle of Blair Mountain in West Virginia, where white coal miners and Black and Italian coal miners together would wear red bandanas around their neck as they fought back against the coal companies during the Union Wars. And I don't know which one is true. I don't know if we'll ever really know. But it's another time when we can talk about like story, right? So you could either have a story that's about solidarity, or you could have a story about people being divided, and I'm just trying to be a slightly better than, as you were talking about.
Why does the story of division seem to be, though, the one that always seems to rise to the top? Because just like the Wilmington Massacre, I hadn't heard about the red bandana story until recent, past couple years, very recent, that I even knew, maybe the past 4 years or something, but there was like a Hollers project or something. I can't remember the name. And it's only because I started doing some work in West Virginia, which is, I think, ended up being how we ended up meeting. It was through the work that I did in West Virginia, through Adrienne and the work she does in Idaho. And so being a part of this cohort that I have been, I think for now 5 years, I've had the opportunity to go to West Virginia a number of times and meet folks and learn about many of the things that folks are proud of that have happened there, that I don't know that I ever would have known otherwise, because I wouldn't even known to really go look for it. But my point is that the idea of the red bandana was not something I had ever heard before that. And I'm glad that you brought that up.
Stories of division, the way stories get out is through influence and power, right? We can move our own stories through our own networks. We can pass down stories, we can tell stories, but who owns the media, right? Who owns the, right now, social media platforms? Story, and to some degree history, is deeply controlled by those who hold power, and those who hold power want us to remain divided. So the story of solidarity is always suppressed in those channels, and the story of division is always going to be lifted up. And I think we as organizers have a responsibility to constantly be shifting that, right? And it's hard. Sometimes the terrible story is the thing that is just on my mind, right? I can't shake it, and I'm sure I've repeated plenty of them, because sometimes the terrible story is true also, right? But I think we just have a deep responsibility to be doing better, and to be trying to think about, like, well, who does want me to believe this version? And again, like with that story about rednecks, I don't know what's true. I don't.
But we do know that happened. Like we know that the red bandana, that thing happened. I don't want to call it the red bandana thing. I want to call it.
Well, the Battle of Blair Mountain is where a lot of
the Battle of Blair Mountain. Okay, yes, which was in Marmot, West Virginia, and they said it was a part of the Courage in the Hollers project. I'm not reading this from Wikipedia, like as we speak, but I just want folks to be able to go and do their own research on it and know a little bit more about that, because we do know that piece is real, whether or not that's why they call them rednecks or not. But the fact that there are other alternatives besides the sunburn, and besides just it being and making it just a pejorative way to talk about someone and make them feel less than or be less than.
That's right. That's right. And so I just think we should always consume our stories and consume our narratives of like, well, who wants this to be true? The truth of it maybe becomes less of the point. Who wants that version to feel like the truth? And that's where I think that years after living in that community where the Vinlanders moved in, I went back and I did a storytelling project there where I worked with my neighbors to co-write a series of stories about what the neighborhood was to them, what was sort of quintessential. And some of them were hard stories about pain and loss, and some of them were beautiful stories. But the point is, the neighborhood was a full round place full of full round humans with full round lives, right? Who both do bad things and good things, who both have sad days and celebrate, their grandchildren's birthdays. Everybody's like that. And it's like, well, what are you going to gravitate towards to define yourself? And white nationalist groups are gravitating towards a lot of like pain and suffering, and translating that to hate in order to define themselves. And we have the opportunity to define our futures in much brighter ways.
So, not to put the onus all on you, but what's the answer to really figuring out how we combat just white nationalism? Because I guess the call is a little bit different for different type of folks, but it's specifically for white folks who live in these areas where they know it's around, whether they engage with it or not. What is the call to action in how to protect our young folks, the young children, the young men from being so susceptible to it? What do we do to keep our young women from becoming partners with these type of folks? What do we do to bring it to a point where the folks don't feel like they need that they don't feel like they need that as an outlet in order to feel whole and a part of society?
My answer is twofold. The first is the best thing we could do to fight white nationalism, to fight nationalism in general, to fight fascism, is to actually provide things that people need to them. We need to be serious about addressing healthcare. We need to be serious about providing real affordable housing. We need to be serious and fight like hell to raise wages. And in those fights, always making sure that we're pointing to the real villain that we're experiencing in our communities, which any Appalachian could tell you was Peabody coal. It's the Sackler family who flooded our communities with opioids. It's these big data centers that are coming into our communities. It's the huge insurance companies that are absolutely making bank off of our healthcare system, right? So providing these things make people less vulnerable because they're safer and more secure. And they can see like real tangible results of what happens when working folks move in coordination with each other across race, across gender, across region, right? You and I have been talking a lot about how the same patterns are occurring in just different places and regions. And the second thing, I think, is to not hide the ball. Sometimes we fall into, and we've talked about it a little bit today, just sort of expressing our outrage about something or condemning something and sort of standing on our soapbox. But I think what we really need to do is talk about like, well, why? White nationalists are not just a fact of being, they are organizing and they're creating pipelines and they have strategy and we see it and we need to talk about it. We need to talk to people and communities about it. We need to say, this guy coming in, this message that's being sent to you, these things that Stephen Miller is saying from Washington, the reason he's doing it is this, and it's this divide and conquer. Move things away from relevant issues of class and of economics in our country. And they're trying to divert you. And there's a reason they're doing that. And nobody wants to be scammed or duped, right? And so I think we should stop hiding the ball and just talk plainly to expose their strategy, because nobody's a fool. People can understand that because they've experienced this level of deception in other ways in their lives. And I just think that we have to like keep talking about what the strategy is instead of just sort of saying like, oh, there are these evil, terrible forces over here. who are just doing this or not like talking about the why. Like what's their end game?
That makes me ask the question then, how do we avoid the wedge? Because this is nothing we're talking about is new, right? Like we've been having the same conversations over and over again. And there have been, as you pointed out, there have been plenty of times where folks have come together, cross cultures, cross race, cross gender for the same common goal as a collective. But somewhere along the lines, there's a wedge that is really put in there and really separates everything, which causes the demise to these movements. It makes me think about Martin Luther King and how he was really trying to organize poor white folks too, and seeing that this is a collective issue. This is not just a race issue. So many of us are oppressed by the same folks. And then things happened after that where that diminished because he died. The same thing can be said even about the women's suffrage movement. At one point, it was a collective of Black women and white women. And then it was just like, no, well, you can't do that. Like, we might give you the vote, but we're not going to give them. You're going to have to separate. And then people make choices, right? Which causes these long-term resentments within when you start thinking about the history of feminism and that sort of thing, because you feel like folks abandon you for their own self-serving reasons. So then I guess wondering, like, how do we avoid this wedge? Because we seem to know that we need each other. We've already connected the dots that a poor white community and a poor Black community basically look the same. They're all lacking the same resources, and that's housing, and that's healthcare, that's nutritious food that is available and affordable, that's jobs that actually pay bills, all of these things, having quality schools with teachers who care about the students, parents being able to be parents and have access to transportation, all the things, right? Like, these are all the basic necessity and needs that we all need in order to live our best life. And when you don't have those things and it just starts to pile up on you, the foundation is cracked. And so you take the poor whites, you take the poor Blacks, you put them in the same room, sing the same country song, because we got all the same problems. And you feel like there could be a kumbaya moment right there. Like, yes, let's fight the real powers at be, right? And then the wedge comes. I'm just wondering, like, how do we avoid it? Not even avoid it. If we see it coming, that we can stop it, and stop it where it starts and move around it and let people know, like, that's just not what we're doing over here. Like, it's not going to work.
Yeah. Well, Erika, I think you just answered your own question in a way where it's like, we know it's coming, right? Whenever we build anything, this country is going to turn 250 years old this year. And we have been through these, we just in the span of this conversation, we've talked about Reconstruction. We've touched a little bit on the era of like the 20s, 30s, 40s. We're talking about contemporary times. We're talking about 20 years ago. The same issues have repeatedly occurred. And, we weren't born yesterday, nor was this country. And so we know it's coming. And I think what you were just saying is like, we've got to prepare for this. Organizing isn't a straight line ever. Something hard is going to happen every time. If you are actually getting close to power and you are bucking up against something, that wedge comes. And that wedge either looks like some billionaire that you're fighting filing a lawsuit against your little itty bitty organization over some remote election law or something that just cripples you and it makes everyone scared. You should know that that's coming, because when you go and you fight with these guys, of course they're going to try to keep what they have. Of course they're going to try to keep what they have. And so we need to prepare ourselves and our people better to say, I'm organizing around housing right now, just in my little neighborhood. We all love each other. We all get along. We're trying to get more affordable housing in our community because we're tired of people having to live in substandard houses. And we're going to do that work. And as we get real close to winning it, a wedge is going to come in. It just is, Erika. And what we need to do is we need to talk about that in advance and talk about how we see it coming, how we gird ourselves against it, and commit to each other that we organize through it. And I think that's what we haven't done, right? Like we keep on, especially around race in the United States, we keep on declaring ourselves post-racial or something. And it's just like, well, that's just not true. And when we keep on declaring that, then we're shocked and surprised when Charlottesville happens. We're shocked and surprised when there's backlash against our first Black president. And we just need to stop being, because we are 250 years old this year. And this has just been repeating itself over and over and over again. And once we get our wits about ourselves and prepare our people and build that into our planning, I think we're going to be a lot further ahead. It's still going to suck when the wedge comes, but we just need to know the line is coming.
Yeah. We just need to be on the lookout. So I want to ask you, though, you talk about the love of the South. Tell me what you love the most about the South.
It's not the humidity.
I like humidity, though.
You know, Erika,
It's good for your skin.
Is that? A couple years back now, my son and I drove cross country. I told you I love a good road trip. We drove cross country, took a whole month camping. We went all over the country, and it was huge for me to see how big our country is and to really think about how place shapes you, right? Like, I just remember sleeping in the back of our truck out in the fields of Wyoming. Oh my gosh, it was just beautiful yellow flowers, and it was so windy, and just sort of sky went on forever. And it was so different from any place I've ever been. And I just thought to myself, wow, I would just be a totally different human if this was home versus where my home is, right? Not better or less, just different. It's just different. And so we drove and we drove and we drove and camped all over. And then when we hit Arkansas and Tennessee, all of a sudden we were back in the South. And the air was thick and the woods are really loud and everything's sort of moist and ghastly hot. And I was like, why do I like the South? Because I was just camping in California like 2 weeks ago.
GTT and Eno Savad.
With an ocean breeze.
Way below acceptable.
And I thought to myself, I like the South because this is such a hard place. It's got a hard history. It's got hard poverty. And it's got really hard politics. And I like the South because it is so hot and so sticky that you can't avoid anything. You have to push and push and push. And the South has given us so many people who come from that sort of, that tradition of understanding hard knocks and hardship and heat. And it gives you really good fighters. It gave us Martin Luther King. It gave us Fannie Lou Hamer. It gave us the Tennessee Three. And I think that people like that are so quintessentially Southern to me because you just know that there's nowhere to go to avoid the heat. And so you just push and push and push. And don't mind that you have to go to bed on top of your sheets for 3 to 4 months out of the year. You wouldn't have it any other way, right? And fighting here in the South is like that. But I think it creates a real interesting sort of grit and spunk that I know has fueled me. And I have friends say to me all the time whenever the North Carolina General Assembly or somebody down here does something just absolutely bananas. I have a friend in New Hampshire who always says, don't forget, I got a cabin up here and it's real nice. And his cabin is lovely. It is absolutely gorgeous. And I would never leave the South because we like to fight. The other thing I'd say about the South is it actually is the place that feels the most multiracial to me. It's a place where we all do really live together and have for a long time and are really like tangled up together, sometimes in some really like hard historic ways and in some really delightful and beautiful ways. I love that I can go to Coolamy, North Carolina, which is this itty bitty little town, and sit next to their dam. There's this great swimming area. And in the summertime, it is just packed with teenagers and families speaking 3-4 different languages in this little itty bitty small town, and a man with a cart who's selling you mangonadas. And it is vibrant, and it is so quintessentially Southern to me in ways that I haven't experienced in other places. So that's why I love the South. And I just think that we have our work to do here. The South is where they try on every bad idea for size, right? Every policy starts down here. And we're on the front lines of trying to fight it. And it's why I ask people all the time who live in other regions to like, stop talking crap about us and actually support us, because if they pass it here, it's coming. It's coming to you next. And so we need support. We don't need ridicule. We need resources, and we need support, and we need love, and we need to know that folks are fighting, are loving us from afar, right? As we do these really hard things and reckon with a hard past.
And a question I ask everybody: what is democracy? And do you think we have it right now in the United States?
No, we do not have it right now. We do not have democracy right now. I think we all spent years like dancing around, like, do I sound alarmist? Do I sound, like, if this happens, but it's happening. We don't have it right now, and we can reclaim it. But, again, I'm from the South. I'm not sure we've ever had democracy and all the promise that it could be, right? And that we want it to be. And this is where story comes in. It's like, we need to keep telling the story of the future, not just the past. And the story of like where we can head and go. And to me, democracy is when people, like real life people, like people who I can look out my window and see right now, have real power to make decisions over their own lives and power to make decisions within their community. And it's not siphoned off to a certain class of people. And so that's what I'm looking for, and that's what I'm fighting for. And I think that that's like why I'm a storyteller, is because I think because we've never fully actualized a real multiracial democracy, we've gotten really close. But I think we need to keep telling stories of the future so that we even understand what it is we're steering ourselves towards. And I say we don't have democracy right now, but I do think we can. Everywhere I go, here in the South and all across the country, I get to witness through my work people who are fighting at the local level, at the regional level, at the federal level, at the state level, in community organizing and in electoral organizing. People who are just putting in and doing the work. So I know that it's at our fingertips. They wouldn't be fighting us so hard if it wasn't.
And then final question: what is your version of the American dream? What does it look like?
Wow. I think that it has a lot to do with people being cared for, and not just myself, but my neighbors. People really just having their basic needs met, right? I don't think it has as much to do with some trajectory to the top as we've often told the story of the American dream. Like you can go and become everything. I don't need to become everything, and I don't need my neighbors to become everything. I don't need some trajectory up. I need things to be okay right now and for myself and the people around me. Because if my neighbor is dying without health care, then I'm not sleeping well at night, right? We've always talked about the American dream in a much more individualistic and striving way. And my version has much more to do with us as a collective all being all right.
I think that's a beautiful sentiment. I appreciate you and I appreciate this conversation. And it could go on even longer. And I think we'll hopefully one day do another part, because I think there's a lot of questions, and I'm hoping folks will chime in and send in questions or thoughts that they have around white supremacy and white nationalism and the connections that I think, are very similar to inner city gangs and all of that. I'm hoping that this opens up more conversation, because I think I told you I had never heard of the majority of these groups. The Proud Boys, of course, because they were the main conspirators who ruined my birthday, January 6th. And so...
No way. Oh my God.
Literally, we were having a party, a little get-together. It was a staff meeting in my office, but, it was my staff had, got me a little sash, and we were eating breakfast and all of that. And you took a picture, and I still have one of the pictures, a selfie I took. Everybody's behind me, and we have a TV behind. And on the TV was right before everything went down, when they were certifying the vote. We had it on. And I'm just like, what are you doing? What are they doing? They're trying to ruin my birthday. They're trying to ruin it. I digress. But
I can only imagine that every birthday party going forward, you should invite people and promise them that it will be wild.
Insurrection. Yeah. That's one of my friends actually called Happy Insurrection Day. Thank you. But, I hadn't heard of Nordic Pride or the Vinlanders or the Hammerskins. I didn't know that they existed, and I don't know where they are, right? And it's also then a matter of, where's the danger around me? Am I being blind to the fact that they could be very close to me, in a neighborhood adjacent to me or what have you? And I think it's also important to be able to know those sort of things and have more of those conversations, because again, it's not an other, and it's not going to look how you think it's going to look. It's walking down the street right next to you. It's on the bus with you. It might be your Uber driver. It's folks around you. And if we have more open dialogues about what we need and what we're lacking, and that doesn't come from a place of embarrassment to say that I can't afford my health care, I can't afford car insurance, I can't afford to get my shower fixed or whatever's happening, because the economy is really pressing on most of our necks in a lot of ways, that if we can say those things out loud, our neighbors are like, yeah, me too. Then it becomes a collective and not an embarrassment that that it's something wrong with me as an individual,
right,
that I can't pull up my own bootstraps. And that's why I'm struggling to pay a high electricity bill or what have you, when it's a bigger picture that the prices were hiked up and we're consuming more, and we have not a lot of choices in the matter. It's not like you can choose what electric company you use or what have you. So there's so much that we can collectively come together on if we open our mouths and say what our struggle is, and then accept the help and accept the support of our neighbors who are also struggling, and collectively we can do better. So I'm hoping that we can come back and have more of that conversation, because I am just really fascinated and interested in a lot of the writings that you have done and the research that you have done, and the fact that you consistently dig deeper to ask the question as to why, but also uplift and tell the stories of the folks around you, so that their voices can be heard. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to Sticky Note Conversations with Erika Washington. Hosted and executively produced by Erika Washington. With editing by Black Gypsy LLC. Special thanks to KUNV 91.5 in Las Vegas. This show is powered by Make It Work Nevada, a project of Tides Advocacy.